Hello, Akira here, and we're doing something a little bit different for this video. Tonight I had the opportunity to play a board game that reminded me a lot of Conquest of Elysium 4. It was a game I had never heard of before, so while I was playing it, I was thinking of you guys, I took a bunch of pictures, and I thought it might be fun to share with you. Now with that said, I'm not a huge board game geek, and I've only played this game once, so everything I'm saying is coming from a place of ignorance, so take it with a grain of salt, and feel free to chime in below if you know better than I do about something. Now, the name of the game is called Talisman, the Magical Quest game. I did a little bit of internet research before this, and I think they're still printing this game, or at least were printing it somewhat recently ago, but they are currently on the 4th edition, which came out in 2008. The original game came out in 1983, and according to the friend of the friend who owns the game, this is his original game from childhood, and this second edition came out pretty close to that 1983 date. So this actual game that we played is fairly old, and it felt very old. The artwork is very retro, and that in and of itself was an experience and fun to sort of play around with. Now, this is a picture of the actual board. I didn't actually take this picture myself. I got so excited I forgot to take a picture of the entire board game, so I borrowed it from some guy's blog. And just to be fair to him, I'm going to put a link in the description below so I can give credit where credit is due. So essentially, this is how it works. There are 3 rings to the game, 3 sort of rings that you can travel around. The outer ring, the middle ring here that's blue, the center ring, which is yellow. You start off out here, and you go around this as many times as you need to by rolling the dice and sort of beefing up your character. And we'll talk about what happens out here in a little bit. But you go around here until your character's strong enough to get to this middle ring, and you do that a bunch of times until you're strong enough to get here. And I think the ultimate goal of the game is to sort of get to this middle tile and King of Hill it, essentially, and hold it for a certain amount of turns, and that's how you win the game. And in order to get there, you have to have a talisman, thus the name of the game. So that is a fairly simple mechanic, but it's definitely not as straightforward as you think it is. A lot of stuff can happen here, and we played for 6 hours. Now, most of us were a little bit new, but we played for 6 hours, and I was the only one to actually get to this middle blue ring, and even then, I only went around it a few times, and we had to call the game. So again, I never actually got to finish the game. I'm not experienced, but we did play for a good amount of time, and I think we could have played for another 6 hours maybe and kept going depending on how things went. So with that said, let's take a look at my character. We'll talk about that a little bit before I talk too much about the other mechanics of the game. So this is the character that I drew. We actually did draw randomly. I'm not sure if you have to or not according to the rules of the game, but we went ahead and did. I was a little disappointed when I drew the monk, but he turned out to be a lot of fun to play. So let's take a closer look at him here. So essentially your character has 2 stats that you start out with, your strength and your craft. And your strength is what you mostly use to sort of battle things, but your craft is sort of like your mana and your magic power, and you sometimes use that. And craft is also used for casting spells. So the higher your craft, the more spells you can actually hold. And I think for every 2 craft, you can have 1 spell, but you can't round up. So at least as I started off, I could only actually have 1 spell with this character. Now, what was cool about my character is one of my special abilities was being able to add up my craft and my strength in combat, giving me an effective combat strength of 5, which is actually fairly powerful. So let's see, what else should we talk about here? Let's go back here. So here's your strength and your craft, which could actually be, you can actually earn more as you go up in the game. So at this point in the game, I had 6 craft and 3 strength. So I had an effective a strength of 9, which is actually really powerful at this point in the game. And I also had some pretty cool followers who were buffing me up as well. So you have those. You have 4 lives, which is essentially your HP. That can go up and down many ways. But if it gets to 0, you're dead and you lose your character, and then you have to start all over with someone from scratch. And it has to be someone else. And of course, you can collect gold, which is good for various amounts of things. You can hold items, and you can obtain followers. Let's take a look. This is another character that was drawn and played. It was the minstrel. I thought this guy was really cool because he has a decently high craft and a pretty low strength. But a really cool trait is that animals and dragons wouldn't attack him. And there's lots of dragons in the game and lots of animals, at least in the early on game. And so that was really, really powerful. And then he had the opportunity to actually take an animal and charm it and actually make it one of his permanent followers, which I thought was really cool. And I think he could only do this once per game. So that was really cool. He was actually able to do that and get a fairly powerful follower from Go 1. Anyway, we won't talk about the rest of his skills because I don't know much about him. But that was another character that was fun to play. The wizard was the other one. And you can look at him. He's sort of the opposite of like what like a barbarian or someone would be. He's got really high craft and really low strength. He starts off the game with 2 spells, and so of course he relies heavily on those to sort of buff his strength, because in a straight fight he's going to lose to pretty much everything. And actually we'll talk about this a little bit. I'll come back here. The way these guys work, let's see if I can zoom in. So this follower might be a bad example, but she gives me 2 extra craft, which for me is great because it essentially gives me 2 extra strength. This guy allows me to befriend animals and have them fight for me one time. And this guy gives me a bonus during dragon fights over here. And I'm actually saying this guy, like you can see where I'm pointing. The gamekeeper gives me the opportunity to capture animals, and the Dragon Slayer gives me a little bit of a bonus against dragons. But however, I have to fight every dragon that I come across. But some followers actually have a strength, and I think let's go over here and see if we can look at. Here's some more. I'll come back to this. Pause it here if you want to take a closer look at some of the other characters who weren't played but are available to play. And there's a whole handful. There must have been at least 30, maybe more. And here's some more of that. So pause it here if you want to take a look at what these are doing. And I definitely recommend having your video on the highest resolution possible to read this fine print. But let's take a look here. These are the cards that you draw as you're sort of randomly coming around the map. You just draw cards, and some of them are enemies you fight. And so this is an example of an enemy you fight, but it might also look like a follower who's going to help you. Essentially, they have... this guy. They essentially have a strength. So this giant, in order to beat him, I guess as an example, my starting strength was 5, if I combine those two, and his strength was 6. So I roll a dice, and someone rolls a dice for him. I take my strength, which was 5, and I add my dice roll to it. So say that's another 5. I have a total attack of 10. Now he rolls a dice, and if he rolls a 4, we tie, and if he rolls less, then he loses. If he loses, he gets taken off the map. If we tie, like nothing happens and he stays on the map. And if he wins, I take a hit to my life and he stays on the map for someone else to fight that lands on that particular area. And so that's sort of an example of the enemies you fight. But you get lots of other things too. So bags of gold, which just gives you gold. This little salesman, which is like a stranger. They all have different descriptions and classes up here of what kind of card they are. This guy allows you to sort of buy a bunch of items in bulk. I apologize for the flash here. That was just a big chest. And you can't see it here. I'm sorry I got cut off, but this is an event that is a worldwide event that changes things for everyone. It can hurt a whole class of people, or it can hurt people with a certain amount of items, or it can just hurt everyone or help everyone in general, depending on sort of what your perception is. This Ring of Command was really cool. This is actually my card, and it allowed me to essentially train a dragon, the first dragon that I came across, and have it fight for me for one whole turn, and actually use that to attack another player and take his item. So I'll talk about that dynamic. So of course, like I mentioned, you have items you can get, and you can actually attack other players. And if you attack them, you fight them the same way you would a regular enemy. But then you have the opportunity to say, hey, I want to take a life from you, or you can steal an item from them. And I actually ended up getting this wand, which was decently powerful. It guarantees me always to have one spell in addition to whatever I have in my craft here. So I took this item from him, and of course there's an exception to every rule in this game, I found out. So you can actually get a special item that allows you to hide items and they can't take it. And again, this game is fairly in depth. So that's sort of how that works. Let me think here. Bear with me. I'm sort of just going through these. That's what all the cards you draw. Here's some more. I think it's just a closer version with different lighting. Okay, so this guy, he's called the Sentinel, and he's on the outer ring. And this is essentially your strength test to get into the blue. So you can choose when to do this. You can actually be here, like it says, do not draw a card if there's already one here. If you're passing through to cross the bridge to the middle region, draw no card, but you must defeat the Sentinel, who has a strength of 9 to pass through. The Sentinel remains even if defeated. So if I beat him and go to this realm, the next person obviously has to beat him. But if you're here, you don't have to fight him. So this is your gate to the inner circle. There's a few things to consider when you do this. So one, he's got a pretty big strength of 9, which is it's fairly hard to beat. But even if you could beat him with a special item, things get sort of progressively harder. Progressively harder as you get to that center ring. And you have to sort of consider if you're ready or not to go. So this game actually had, this is a closer picture of the inner circle. That's right. So again, sort of pause it here if you want to look at it. Things get pretty harsh here. So you can die pretty quickly if you're not ready. So you definitely have to be ready before you take on that inner circle. Now this game had some expansions. And so each one of some parts of the board, maybe let me go back here to the first part here. Bear with me. You can't really see it, but like this is the city. You can actually go here. And I think the game has expansions. And normally all this does here is just offer you a dice roll, like roll 1 through 2 and this happens to you, and 2 through 4 this happens, and 5 and 6 this happens, and you might get some gold or be able to purchase an item. But this game has expansions that make this an entire a visitable area in and of itself. So the 2 expansions we were playing with was the city and the dungeon. And so let me go back to that to show you what that looks like here. Okay, so this is the dungeon. I never actually made it myself into the dungeon, but another player did. So if you find yourself in the dungeon, you have to go through this. You have to roll until you get out of the dungeon. And some bad things can happen to you while you're in here. And I think some good things can happen too. So as an example, if you get into this kitchen, a roll of 1, you get poisoned, you lose a life. A roll of 2 and 3, essentially nothing happens. 4 or 5, you actually heal, and 6, you get 2 lives back. So, like, again, it can be very good or bad. And the gist I got from the game is, in areas like this, and sort of the middle of the last, really, really bad things can happen, but also some really, really good things can happen too. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if you find yourself in the dungeon. Some good can come out of it too. Plus, it's a lot of fun. So this was the dungeon expansion. Excuse me there. And this is the city expansion. I'm sorry for my flash. They were not coming out with it, and I'm not a great photographer, so we won't get to see what this whole middle thing looks like. But this is the city. And like I said, you land on that one spot, and then you essentially do a dice roll check here at the beginning to see if you can even get in. And I'll go ahead and just read this if you can't read it. But like a roll of 1, you get in, but you have to take a warrant, which sort of means you're wanted here, and that can have consequences. A roll of 2, you get in, but you got to pay gold. A roll of 3, you get in. A roll of 6 has no effect, and you have to go back maybe or something. But essentially, you're not guaranteed to get in. But once you pass the dice roll check, you get in, and then you start rolling around this board until you can exit. There's a few ways to get out. But essentially, this has various shops that can be very beneficial. So I was playing as the monk. There was, let's see if I can find a temple in here. Magic, it was up here that gave me allowed me to pray and allowed some really cool things to happen there. And it could actually transport you directly to the third or to the second ring. You can get, this is damaged armor, and you can actually get that repaired here and make that usable. You can buy magic goods, you can sell things. So this was a really cool aspect of the game that, of course, is sort of an expansion to it that I really enjoyed. So I visited this a lot. I sort of ended up being a tinkerer in that I had lots of items and I was able to actually hold an infinite amount because I bought a mule. And so that was a dynamic of the game I really enjoyed. That, of course, was an expansion that doesn't exist with the game. So that's all the pictures I have. All in all, if you read the Wikipedia, the initial reviews of the game, I'll agree with. So it does take a very long time to play, which I have no problem with. I play a game called Axis and Allies. It's the global version, which is stupidly complex. When my friends and I get together and play it, it literally takes us 2 full days. So I have no problem with long board games, but it can be a problem for a lot of people. Like I said, we spent 6 hours, and I had just got to this area. I think 12 would have been the total amount played if we could have finished it. So it was very long. And then some people say that it relies too heavily on dice rolls and like there's not a whole lot of decision making going on. And I'll definitely agree with that, that a lot of the game is down to chance, but it was very entertaining. It's very deep. From what I could tell, all these different characters make it highly replayable. And like I said, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Conquest of Elysium 4. Obviously, you're not dealing with whole armies here or anything like that, but just with the vast amount of characters and things you run into, it's just as deep as that game. So I thought it was interesting. I thought I'd share it with you guys. Definitely do some research. It's something that you can buy off the internet for, 40, 50 bucks, I think. You could probably end up spending a fair amount of money with the expansions and stuff. But if you're into board games and you like Conquest of Elysium 4, this may be something you're into. So thank you for joining me. I hope you didn't mind my little divergence from what I'm normally doing. I'll be back to that, of course, soon and keep updating those regularly. Nothing's changing. So have a great night. We'll talk to you later.